Money Magazine, Friday night at 9 on Pearl.
EXCO decides not to renew ATV's license. Calls for Securities and Futures Commission to investigate ATV's claims of a deal with Ricky Wong. And in Taiwan, protests against a government decision to join the AIIB.
Good evening. After a crisis that has dragged on for years, the demise of Hong Kong's oldest TV station may have just arrived. The Executive Council decided today against renewing ATV's free-to-air licence. In light of the situation, the Communications Authority also announced it has officially granted a 12-year free-to-air licence to PCCW's Hong Kong Television Entertainment Company. Jean de Silva begins our coverage.
In a last-ditch effort for survival, ATV managed to get the decision on the renewal of its licence postponed to March 31st. But today the broadcaster's moment of truth arrived and it confirmed its worst fears.
This is the first time in the local broadcasting history that an incumbent's broadcasting licence is not renewed. The CENC earlier imposed a deadline of 30th March 2015 for ATV to submit concrete implementation details. ATV, however, failed to do so by the deadline, and the CENC today has made a non-renewal decision.
After today's announcement, ATV's channels will remain on air for another 12 months. The broadcaster issued a statement saying it was surprised and angry about the Executive Council's decision as it was made after a new investor had been confirmed. It said it will continue fighting for its survival and will not rule out taking legal action. The Executive Council's decision blasted away hopes expressed earlier by ATV's Executive Director, Ip Kapo, that the licence would be renewed.
I hope that the license can be renewed at this moment that we had a new investor has signed a MOU with our major investors.
At a press conference scheduled for just before the Executive Council's special meeting, ATV's court-appointed manager announced an agreement that would see the sale to a new investor of the 52.4% stake held by investor Wang Zheng through his family. They were also very clear about the consequences that such a decision will have for the broadcaster's future.
Of course, as I said earlier, if the Hong Kong government refused to renew, then the TV station will collapse, obviously.
Lai added that the new agreement reached this morning included a plan for the broadcaster's future, but refused to disclose details such as the sum involved and the identity of the new investor. For one brief moment, however, the offer was shown and photographers managed to snap pictures of the document, which appears to have come from Hong Kong-based firm AID Partners Capital. The buyout company last year saved HMV from bankruptcy. Juan de Silva, TVB News.
Lawmakers have criticised ATV for its reports yesterday, which claimed a deal was reached for the sale of shares in the free-to-air broadcaster to Ricky Wong, chairman of Hong Kong Television Network or HKTV. In particular, they want the authorities to look into the impact on stock prices involved. The Securities and Futures Commission says it won't comment on individual cases.
Last night, ATV News reported about a deal with Ricky Wong, though it didn't mention HKTV or owner Ricky Wong's response. Before the markets opened this morning, HKTV issued a notice clarifying that Ricky Wong had not struck any deals in principle or otherwise on behalf of himself or the company. It said Wong had met once with ATV's major investor Wang Zheng on March 26th to discuss how to help the broadcaster continue its operations and matters relating to its free-to-air license. This morning, HKTV stocks, both in the US and in Hong Kong, saw a surge. Lawmakers call the situation dubious.
The local securities authority must get into the incident and see what exactly has happened with the share prices and whether anyone has benefited from the goings up and down.
ATV was also criticized for its handling of the story.
ATV used apparently have used the news broadcast of its own programs to release the information about this alleged investment by Ricky Wong and HKTV. Now, is that appropriate?
Mok questioned if the Communications Authority should look into the misreport, as it could be in breach of license regulations. But ATV denied it had aired false reports. News chief Lau Lan-cheng said the news reports were only about ATV's decision to sell to Ricky Wong without making up his side of the story. He said ATV announced it had made the decision, so of course the news would report on it and then follow up the issue and get responses from HKTV.
ATV's woes have been well documented in recent years. It started off as Hong Kong's first television service, debuting more than half a century ago as Rediffusion TV.
Asia Television started off as a mostly English subscription TV service named Rediffusion on May 29, 1957. The station was renamed RTV after it was given a free-to-air broadcasting license in the early 1970s. Huang Xizhao, its first Chinese general manager, was credited with having nurtured local TV talent. They produced a number of iconic TV shows that were popular, rivaling TVB's. The theme songs of some of these shows are still well known today. In 1982, the founder of the Far East Group, Deacon Chiu, bought RTV and renamed it Asia Television. In 1987, a fire that burned for 8 hours damaged ATV's studios, but it continued to broadcast with the help of TVB. Under Chiu, ATV managed to post a profit. In 1988, the Lim Po Yen family took over. At its peak, it had some 2,700 staff. There was controversy in 1994 when 6 senior members of ATV News resigned over a decision by management to pull a documentary about the June 4th Tiananmen Square crackdown. The TV station continued to struggle financially, with ownership changing hands a number of times. In December 2008, Ricky Wong, founder of City Telecom, became ATV's chief executive officer. He quit 12 days later. In 2010, mainland property businessman Wang Zheng, a former Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference member, began investing in ATV. He announced he would put $2 billion into the company over 20 years and make it the CNN of Asia.
But
it was bad news in 2011 when ATV News misreported the death of former President Jiang Zemin. Wang denied any involvement. ATV News retracted the report and made a public apology. The Communications Authority later found Wang had interfered with ATV's operations. It ordered the removal of Wang's relative James Shing from the board. In 2012, an ATV program criticizing anti-national education campaigners drew some 40,000 complaints. In the second half of 2014, ATV began failing to pay its staff on time. The High Court ordered Deloitte to step in as manager and help find a white knight to take over the troubled company. But the station's woes continued, with court cases over owed wages. Last week, a mainland news outlet reported that Wang Zheng said ATV could cease to operate by the end of March.
On to some other news now. More than 40 governments have applied to become founding members of the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. But the move by Taiwan to do so has sparked controversy on the island.
Chaos in Taipei. Scuffles erupted outside the presidential palace last night between the police and students protesting against the decision of President Ma Ying-jeou's government to join the AIIB. Demonstrators said the decision lacked transparency. More than 20 of them were taken away by police. Earlier, at around 7 o'clock last evening, In the final hours before the application deadline, the Taiwan government came up with a letter of intent to join the AIIB as a founding member. Beijing has welcomed Taipei's decision. More than 40 governments have applied to join the bank, but Japan is not among them. Finance Minister Taro Aso said his country is still seeking answers about how the regional financing institution would be governed. And there are signs the United States may be softening its opposition to the bank. That's according to the US Treasury Chief, who visited China recently.
We've made clear to China that the United States stands ready to welcome new additions to the international development architecture, including the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, provided that these institutions complement existing international financial institutions and that they share the international community's strong commitment to genuine multilateral decision-making and ever-improving lending standards and safeguards. I was encouraged by my conversations in Beijing, in which China's leaders made clear that they aspire to meet high standards and welcome partnership.
Still, Beijing and Washington are at odds over the yuan. Liu said more reform is needed before it could be included in the International Monetary Fund's basket of global currencies.
Taiwanese authorities have found food and drug manufacturers on the island have been making products using industrial-grade magnesium carbonate. Investigators revealed the chemicals were sold to 3 spice manufacturers by a company in Taichung. The company also sold the industrial-grade chemical to a drug manufacturer. It's estimated that around 80 tons of tainted products, which include pepper and curry powder, were put on the market, and 900 kilos of drugs also had to be withdrawn.
Iranian nuclear negotiators resumed talks in Switzerland today, just hours after abandoning a self-imposed March 31st deadline. Yesterday's talks dragged into the early hours of this morning. Foreign ministers for China, France and Russia all departed overnight, but the significance of their absence is unclear. The remaining ministers and the Chinese, French and Russian officials left behind are looking to reach understandings with Iran that would form the basis for a comprehensive agreement to be reached by the end of June.
The United Nations said an airstrike on a refugee camp in Yemen on Monday that killed dozens of people was a violation of international law. It's still unclear who fired the missiles, and another airstrike in Yemen yesterday destroyed a dairy factory, killing 23 workers. Alan Buckner reports.
The strike on the factory is another case of a big number of civilian deaths in the Saudi Arabia-led campaign against Shiite Houthi rebels who have taken control of large parts of Yemen. It's aimed at stopping the Houthis and former President Ali Abdullah Saleh from winning control of the country. The assault mission is to reinstate Saudi-backed President Abed Rabu Mansour Hadi, who fled the country. Monday's attack in North Yemen that saw dozens of people killed was denounced at the United Nations.
We have not identified who is responsible for this attack. Whoever is responsible, this is a violation of international humanitarian and human rights law.
Hack said because of the fierce fighting in Yemen, the United Nations has pulled its international staff from the country.
Right now, the work of the UN on the ground will have to be done by our local staff, of whom there are several hundred.
Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Saud al-Faisal, said the kingdom is still seeking clarification on Monday's incident. Houthis accuse coalition jets of firing on the refugee camp. Al-Faisal said the assault against the Houthis will continue undeterred. 6 days of airstrikes have targeted Houthi-held military hardware, including jets, tanks, anti-aircraft guns, and ballistic missiles. But so far, they failed to eject the militias from cities and other territory they hold. Al-Faisal said a ground assault on the rebels remains a possibility. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
An Istanbul prosecutor was killed after Turkish security forces stormed the office where members of a far-left group had taken him hostage. Officials said Mehmet Selim Kiraz died from his wounds in hospital after being shot 3 times in the head and twice in the body. His 2 hostage takers were killed by police. Kiraz was leading an investigation into the death last March of a 15-year-old boy who died from wounds sustained during an anti-government protest. The hostage takers were reportedly demanding confessions from policemen responsible for the boy's death. After 6 hours of negotiations, police heard shots